When a literarily aware person experiences a great piece of fiction, something very special happens. There is an intense, conscious level satisfaction that is thrilling in a way that is hard to describe. There is no easier starting point for gaining literary awareness than understanding plot, and there is no better work to help understand how plot works than looking at Berserk. Specifically, Kenpudenki, the 1997 anime version. Berserk utilizes Shakespearean-style cause and effect emphasis in structuring a plot that is both highly effective and very easy to analyze. So Berserk starts out with a quick abbreviation of the Black Swordsman arc, then goes to focus entirely on the Golden Age arc content of the story. This whole arc sets up all the future content for Berserk. That arc, especially this anime version of it, is a very highly effective, self-contained story unto itself. The Golden Age arc was a case of a story built around very specific end goal conditions, and it's not rare to hear writers talk about coming up with stories with the ending in mind, either from the start or from a very early stage, and there's a good reason for this. Plot is conflict, and conflict means working toward an end goal. If nothing is desired, there can be no goal, and therefore there can be no conflict. The climax and end of a story is usually the result of how much or how little that goal was reached and how. In other words, the details of success or failure. So there are many elements of plot we can talk about in Berserk, but I want to focus specifically on the most fundamental elements and the technical workings of it. So, how does plot work? A plot at its most fundamental level operates on two elements: a goal and events. Events chronologically unfold and reach a point where the goal becomes either reached or not reached, or something in between. This is subjective to the point of view of the work. So when it comes to Griffith's goal of becoming powerful to the point of ruling a kingdom, physically speaking, if we ignore the Beylit, Griffith failed at this goal the moment the event where he was crippled in prison took place. However, from the point of view of the work, we don't have confirmation that Griffith actually failed until the event where Guts gets confirmation, as we are largely biased to and limited to Guts' perspective. During this content, we're only given basically inconclusive information outside of Guts' viewpoint. The conflict of whether or not Griffith is going to rise to great political power ends at the moment of the reveal of his permanently crippled state, not the occurrence of it. It's sort of like a Schrodinger's cat before that, to put it based in otaku terms. If a story could just be defined by a single goal that either succeeds or fails, stories would have a hard time getting particularly interesting and unique. And Berserk is obviously much more than just a simple question of whether or not Griffith can rise to great political power or not. So this is where subplots, story arcs, and dynamic goals come in. When we were first introduced to Berserk, it is actually through a very simple and somewhat cliche subplot. Guts arrives in a town that's at the mercy of a corrupt tyrant, and he gets in a conflict with this tyrant, ultimately brings him down. Even at the time of release, this is a plot we've seen 1,000 times. What strikes us about this subplot is, however, the fact that Guts is both occultically cursed and clearly permanently in some kind of edgy mode mentally. It's not the simple conflict, it's the properties of the main character. By the end of this episode, it's very clear that this immediate conflict in the town is just a piece of something much larger that Guts is fighting. Thus, we know that we just experienced a subplot, a defined goal that reaches its end, but only serves as a series of events that work toward the conclusion of a larger goal. In other words, a complete plot that is only a part of a larger plot. Suddenly, we are struck with a bold look into the past. We quickly come to realize that Guts is not dealing with the problems he was dealing with in the first episode in this younger state. This means his goals are different, which in turn means that we are part of a different overarching plot. In other words, a different story arc. Story arcs are not only incredibly useful devices literarily, but they're also extremely effective at making a story feel epic. Berserk telling the audience extremely early in the story that the overarching plot in Guts' present time relies on a plot that stretches all the way back to younger years sets us up for a story that feels like it's going to cover a lot of ground. It's the same way a very advanced discussion relies on prior knowledge. With a basic understanding of subplots and story arc covered, let's get a deeper understanding of goals. As a basic rule of thumb, the most important goal in a story, and therefore the goal that defines the current story arc, is the goal of the protagonist. Guts begins with no goal other than survival. Tension is suddenly zeroed out because this goal is so simple and in a constant state of being essentially accomplished. The inherent tension produced by a goal expands linearly with how difficult that goal is to accomplish. The initial goal presented in episode 1 appeared to be a fight against the entire network of an evil hegemony, and simple day-to-day survival for a strong character is obviously nothing comparisons to that. So this creates a lot of anticipation because we are wondering how we're going to build to that state we saw prior. The next goal becomes dealing with the Takanodan, the Band of the Hawk. This happens after Griffith forces Guts to work for him. Tension is higher here because this is a more complex goal with a more vague end condition. As you can see, a goal can simply be replaced with another goal in this fashion to build into a higher state of tension. But why is this okay? If the goal is the identity of the plot, isn't switching to another goal like dropping the plot? Shouldn't this feel like unresolved tension and feel very uncomfortable to the audience? Well, the reason this works is actually very simple. Any goal can be dropped in favor of another goal with no loss of tension as long as the new goal carries all the tension present in the dropped goal. For this reason, it's more apt to call this an evolution of a goal. In the case of Berserk here, the tension produced by Guts' goal of daily survival is the result of questions of Guts' capabilities and questions of what is he going to have to face in the world. These questions are still present and an inherent part of the question of how well he is going to fare in the Band of the Hawk. He still must continue to prove himself on the battlefield in the same manner. Griffith is especially interested in him, partially for the extent to which he can do this. Thus, no tension is lost even when the goal changes. The story progresses, and Guts eventually emotionally submits loyalty to Griffith. Griffith's goal is now the end goal, as Guts makes helping Griffith with his goals more or less his own goal, by proxy. Like the previous case, no tension is lost here, because it's a proper evolution of the previous goal. It carries on all the same elements. All the same questions are still questions. So finally, as the final evolution of this evolving goal, upon hearing that Griffith does not view Guts as an equal, the goal becomes becoming equal to Griffith. So that's 4 stages of evolution that the goal goes through to reach this point, and each time the tension ramps up further. At this point, something very interesting happens. Guts goes on a journey to accomplish this goal of becoming equal to Griffith, but meanwhile, Griffith actually suffers a great tragedy. So this immediately produces an intense amount of tension because the definition of what becoming equal to Griffith even entails gets thrown into question. The win condition, so to speak, of this goal is incredibly confusing now, and thus it's an extremely difficult to achieve goal, because if it's hard to even define what exactly that entails, what goes into achieving that now? Guts does not lose his respect for Griffith that made him gain this goal of becoming equal to him, even upon observing the terrible fate that Griffith met. So much so to the point where he holds out delusional hope for him, even that with Griffith's mangled state, somehow he will get back on his feet. That goal is very much pronounced of becoming equal to him. However, a new goal starts for how to deal with the aftermath of Griffith's tragedy. This goal does not replace the previous goal of becoming equal to Griffith. It manifests uncomfortably beside it, utterly unclear how these two goals are going to coexist in the coming events, or which goal is even dominant. And these goals contradict each other. To become equal with Griffith is to believe that it's not over for him, but to deal with the aftermath of his fall is to admit that it very well may be over for him, and move on. Putting the goal in an ambiguous state of dominance between these two extremely high tension goals that threaten to contradict each other tends to produce a ton of tension by default, as it becomes more the sum of the tension of both put together. This is incredibly effective for building towards a climax where this ambiguity is going to be cleared up. In Berserk's case, the two goals converge brilliantly when Griffith's fall results in Griffith abandoning all morality and betraying Guts for the sake of great power. And this specifically makes it so that the goal of dealing with the aftermath of Griffith's fall and the feelings of inferiority that make Guts pledge to become Griffith's equal in the first place become one in the same when Griffith asserts dominance over every single aspect of Guts' life, specifically as the result of this fall. So we have concluded a major story arc here. Guts failed in his quest to become Griffith's equal, and he failed to reach a positive conclusion after Griffith's fall. However, a new goal emerges from this failure, which is, like I said, the combination of where these goals converged. Now Guts is in conflict with an evil almighty hegemony that is ruled by Griffith. It's a goal that inherits the whole crescendo of tension that was the Golden Age arc. This is an extremely satisfying conclusion because it gives meaning and function to every single thing we experience up to this point. The way Berserk's plot moves like this, constantly passing the tension from one goal to another, gradually building towards a shocking, tragic conclusion where entities reveal their deepest nature, is the most straightforward way to build an effective plot and is going to be the most easy to understand from a casual viewing experience as well as an analytical. The roots of this approach can actually be seen way back to the beginning of recorded storytelling itself. So, given Berserk's age, predating most of the most impressive works of otaku media, it does make sense that we'd see a story be this effective this early using more classic, straightforward storytelling methods before the more experimental and unusual stuff gets truly understood. So ultimately, what is the purpose of all this goal and story stuff? Why create these thought experiments with these goals? Well, it all goes back to the concept of thematic development, like I talked about in my other video about storytelling. The process in which a goal is worked toward And then the specific result that is achieved or not achieved is actually developing an endlessly complex and specific discussion about the nature of life itself when it's executed properly. But how exactly does this work? And how does all that mood stuff I talked about in the other video fit into this? Well, that is for next time, when I'll explain exactly what goes into actually executing a plot, not just structuring. I don't know exactly what story I'm going to use for my example there, but if anyone has a suggestion, I may not ignore it. So look forward to that.